The Guardian is reporting that new leaked documents suggest that the Russian government had launched a multi-agency effort to interfere in the political happenings of the United States. This is specifically in regard to the 2016 election. Before I go on with more of what we know from these leaked documents, let me just be clear that as far as we know so far, the leaked documents do not indicate that Donald Trump was privy to what the Russian government was attempting to do in meddling in the election. And also, it's a little strange that this leak happened in the first place, because leaks from the Russian government don't typically happen. So keep that in mind. However, what we're learning from this leak coincides with, or very much goes along with, what was found in the Mueller investigation. Remember, the Mueller investigation, along with other investigations by the intelligence community, did find that the Russian government was attempting to meddle in our election. However, it failed to conclude that there was conspiracy, meaning that Donald Trump was working with the Russian government to essentially rig the election or win the election in his favor, right? So with that said, here's what we know from the leaked documents. Vladimir Putin personally authorized a secret spy agency operation to support a mentally unstable Donald Trump. And mentally unstable is in quotes because that's what Putin referred to him as.
Or the Kremlin did.
The Kremlin did support a mentally unstable Donald Trump in the 2016 US presidential election during a closed session of Russia's National Security Council, according to what are assessed to be leaked Kremlin documents. Now, the key meeting took place on January 22nd of 2016 with Putin, his spy chiefs, and senior ministers. Russia's 3 spy agencies were ordered to find practical ways to support Trump in a decree appearing to bear Putin's signature. By this point, Trump was the frontrunner in the Republican Party's nomination race. The report prepared by Putin's expert department recommended Moscow use all possible force to ensure a Trump victory. Now, again, it's highly unusual that we get any kind of leak from the Kremlin, but it has been confirmed as valid documents, right? So it's not some made up story. These appear to be verified documents from the Kremlin. There's a brief psychological assessment of Trump, according to these documents, who is described in an impulsive or as an impulsive, mentally unstable, and unbalanced individual who suffers from an inferiority complex. The Trump win will definitely lead to the destabilization of the US's socio-political system and see hidden discontent burst into the open, it predicts. So this wasn't just about getting Trump elected, it was about essentially ripping the country apart, which, I mean, mission accomplished. I don't think it's just meddling by the Russian government. I mean, if anything, Donald Trump was a catalyst for a lot of division in the country, right? So there was a lot going on the surface, and Trump did quite a bit to really exploit some of the cracks within American society, some of the disagreements among American society, and that led to a lot of the division that we're experiencing today. So there's that, and let me give you one more graphic here. There's also apparent confirmation that the Kremlin possesses compromat or potentially compromising material on the future president, collected, the document says, from Trump's earlier non-official visits to Russian Federation territory. But there are no specifics on that. And anyway, I have my thoughts on that component of the leaked documents. But Cenk, what do you think?
Yeah, okay, so whenever it comes to this issue, everybody immediately breaks into camps and shuts off their minds, right? So you have if we're being honest about it, the MSNBC Rachel Maddow camp, which is the Russians did it. If it wasn't for the Russians, poor Hillary Clinton would have won, and it's all the Russians' fault. And by the way, you're going to freeze in the country because of the Russians, and on and on and on. Everything is the Russians, right? And then you have the opposite camp, which says, if you mention the word Russia, I'm going to scream Russiagate as loud as I can, and I'm not going to listen to any evidence at all, and I'm going to repeat the same exact talking point that Trump does every time, and scream Russia, 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 right? And that's it. I shut off my mind. I don't want to hear any evidence. So we're not in either one of those camps. So and this story confirms a lot of what we've been telling you in the past. So I think that Trump has had a lot of, it's confirmed, he's had a lot of business dealings with Russia in the past, and I was concerned about that. But I told you guys, I didn't see any evidence that Trump had worked with the Russians in the election, in the 2016 election. And one of the pieces of evidence I gave you was Roger Stone, who I despise maybe more than anyone in the country, was desperately trying to get information about what the Russians were up to from WikiLeaks. Now, if Roger Stone and Trump were already working with the Russians, why would they need to go to WikiLeaks to get the information? That makes no sense. And this story makes no mention of Donald Trump in any way coordinating with the Russians. The Russians, if this story is correct, have internal memos where they are talking about this guy's an idiot and we could use him as a useful idiot, which the Russians use a lot of people as useful idiots. In fact, they later talk about media viruses that they're gonna set off in America. We'll come back to that too, right? So, but they never say, oh, and then Trump told us this and we told Trump that. And they've got leaks from inside the Kremlin and it never says it, right? So be fair. It looks like Trump did not coordinate with the Russians in 2016, also according to this story, which is damaging to him.
Can I add something to that? Because while these leaked documents indicate that the Russians have some sort of, they have compromise on him, right? Listen, Trump was he would do things that would conflict with one another when it came to Russia, right? And we have to be clear about that. So on one hand, he seemed to, defer to Putin rhetorically all the time, and it would infuriate people, right? But then at the same time, like when you really listen to what he was saying or when he would defend Putin, it was always in the context of Russia meddling in the 2016 election. And remember, we're talking about a guy who has thin skin and is an egomaniac and doesn't want anyone to think for a second that he didn't fairly win the election, right? So I would argue that that's what motivated some of his defense of Putin. But in terms of actions, he did implement sanctions against Russia, and he even did something that Obama wasn't willing to do, which was sell weapons to Ukraine. Right, so I think that those are important facts to add to this story. So I say that because if Trump knew that they had some damning information about him and they were holding that over his head, I don't think he would be selling weapons to Ukraine. I don't think he would have gone against Russia's wishes in bombing Syria.
Yeah, well, look, I halfway agree with that. So those things are true, and you should keep that in mind in its important context. And knowing Trump, it's at least a halfway persuasive case, because when Trump's financial interests or personal interests are involved, he's not a subtle guy. He doesn't do a lot of nuance. So that's on the side of Trump. Okay. Now on the opposite side, people use a couple of examples as if Trump was actually tough on Russia. He was not. 8 out of 10 times he was over the top solicitous of Russia and everything they demanded. Oh, Crimea, of course they should have Crimea, right? And NATO sucks, right? And we should withdraw from Northern Syria. And I can give you example after example. And by the way, Russia's not the only country he was solicitous of. He was also solicitous of Turkey and other countries, right?
That's true, yeah.
And so just give full, fair context to everything. Now, the compromise, I have no idea if it's true. And by the way, people will make up 1,000 things about what we theoretically said. When the Steele dossier broke, we never even covered it because we thought it was like BuzzFeed talked about it. Everybody talked about it. We didn't even talk about it on the show when it first broke because we thought that's way too speculative. They don't have actual evidence. It doesn't even sound like Trump. He hates germs and et cetera, right? So now in this case, it's curious that they make a reference to the compromise, but don't actually give the compromise.
Yeah, there's something, I don't know. There's just something fishy about this.
I have speculation on that,
yeah.
Okay? Now, we're dealing with facts. I'll save the speculation to the end, okay? And so, but keep that in mind. Oh, we have compromise, but it's not in this story, okay? So you take that with whatever you want. But the main thrust of these documents is they say, number one, it's great to have a mentally unstable person as the head of the US because it'll help our interests. That's definitely true. And our media had to call it 50-50 because in the beginning, because they're like, oh no, we can't criticize anybody. People get mad at us, right? And now even some in the theoretical left say you can't ever criticize Trump. They go, oh no, how dare you? Don't ever say the word Russia, etc. So we're all ignoring the elephant in the room, which is that Trump has always been mentally unstable. Anybody with eyes and ears can see it and hear it, right? But the second part was, let's agitate for destabilizing America. And so that part they did do. Trump didn't coordinate, but there's overwhelming evidence that the Russians did in fact go into social media, do troll farms, do all those things, and there's no evidence that they ever let up. They're very likely still doing it. In fact, there's very recent reports of them doing it. Because Trump didn't coordinate with them doesn't mean the Russians didn't do it. They did do it. Now you could say, hey, it wasn't relevant. Okay, well that's a judgment call. Was it relevant? Was there 1,000 other ways Hillary Clinton could have won? Definitely. So it's not about Hillary Clinton, but does it affect in getting us to fight each other and destabilize America? It appears they've been pretty successful in that effort. But the final part of it is also very important. They say in the documents, Trump will be easier to manipulate. We will get him in bilateral talks with just Putin, and Putin will run circles around him. Now it's a little bit of boasting and kissing up to Putin, because remember it's a Kremlin official that's writing this. So and he knows Putin's going to read it. He's going to be like, yeah, that's right, I will do that, right? So keep that in mind for context, right? He's the guy who pretended to play hockey with professional hockey players in Russia.
He also did the staged. My favorite is the staged photo shoot, shirtless on a horse.
Okay, but in the hockey game, he scored 5 goals on the best Russian hockey players.
Obviously.
Come on, guys. But I'm sure that there's people out there now on the left and right going, how dare you, Russia? He did score those 5 goals.
100%.
Okay,
yeah.
So anyways, but it is true, and it turned out to be exactly right. And by the way, that would be somewhat, evidence in favor of Trump in a sense, because it's much worse if Trump goes in and goes, what money do you have for me? Are you going to do more money laundering through Trump Towers, etc.? Okay, then I'll do this favor for you. That's worse for him. What's better is he's a moron, and Putin did run circles around him. They knew they were going to run circles around him, and they did, right? And he's like, oh yeah, okay, you want me to attack NATO? I'll do it. You want me to clear you of any meddling? I'll do it. You want to keep Crimea? I'll do it, right? And so that's the best case scenario for Trump. The worst case scenario is when he came out of those bilateral talks with Putin and he ripped up the American translators' notes and then made sure that American translators did not attend the next 2 meetings. Well, that's a bad case scenario, and that's still possible, but we don't know that part yet, okay? But it's very fishy that that Trump would not allow American translators in those meetings. Now, the final 2 pieces are, I want to read you the part about the media viruses. Okay, this is from the Guardian piece. There are paragraphs on how Russia might insert, quote, media viruses into American public life, which could become self-sustaining and self-replicating. These would alter mass consciousness, especially in certain groups, it says, okay? Media viruses that would alter people's consciousness and get them to defend Russia despite all available evidence. I don't know what they could be talking about. I'm sure that didn't happen. Okay, so now finally, why this leak? Now, there's no way of knowing. That's why this is the part that is speculation. Look, and I speculated about this before, right or wrong. I said, look, since the Russians are basically trolling us and getting us to fight each other, and they're doing it super effectively. And remember, they pose as Bernie Sanders supporters, which drives me crazy. I hate that they did that, because that allows the mainstream media to pretend we're all Russian operatives, right? And and they pose as Black Lives Matter folks, etc. Those are among the media viruses that they unleashed inside America. And that's greatly harmful. And I said, look, if you're doing that kind of trolling operation, at the end, you'd let us know that you did the trolling operation. Because at that point, then the Maddos would go crazy. It's the Russians, it's the Russians. The anti-Maddos would be like, Russiagate, Russiagate, Russiagate. And they'd rip each other apart. And Trump would say, oh no, I didn't do it, right? And everybody else would say, and it would create more division. And it would get Putin to do a victory lap going, I effed you guys. And now I'm rubbing it in your face. And by the way, that will actually help to cause you guys to rip each other apart even more, right? So if your objective was to split America, you would brag about it later. How the hell are they gonna get documents from the Kremlin unless the Kremlin leaked it?
Yeah.
So, we won't know for sure, but it's incredibly possible the Kremlin itself was like, let's mock them a little bit. Here's what we're gonna do to you. And by the way, we did it, you idiots. Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.